What's up, ego hackers? Welcome to season 32, episode 12, the 4 octagram variants of the INFJ archetype. Thank you for joining us. This particular lecture actually will be. The INTJ lecture was also just as important, but within that context of where I filmed it in downtown, there's a lot of interruptions and was very distracting. I'm sure a few of the INTJs out there got a little upset about this, but it couldn't be helped. And because I prefer to be raw and real with my content, I decided to leave that content in the lecture for all of you to enjoy. And because I'm a show-off, so why not? So yeah, thank you for joining. So what is the octagram? The octagram is basically the ego hacker version of the Enneagram. And as always, I have some severe problems with the Enneagram. The Enneagram mixes nature and nurture simultaneously. And I do not appreciate that because oftentimes when you go from Jungian analytical psychology community to community, it ends up oftentimes having a... They end up combining them. And it's like, oh, I'm an ESTP who's a 5 wing 3. And I'm just like, wow, why don't I just go jump off a bridge right now as you just continue to stir and sow all of the confusion in the world into people, into the laymen who actually have no concept of Jungian analytical psychology. And they are relying on dinosaur tools like the MBTI as well as the Enneagram. And this is not my intention, nor is it my preference, like by any means. So we have this thing called the octagram, which is not a dinosaur tool, but thematically speaking, I understand why people love the Enneagram. The 9 different spokes of the Enneagram, and how we have this thing where it's like, oh, I'm the giver, or I'm the enthusiast, etc. And I understand that it has that use, but it's entirely untechnical. And the testing process for determining one's Enneagram is also ridiculous. And because of that, and it's funny because I feel like the pot calling the kettle black, the Barnum effect is actually a huge problem when it comes to considering the Enneagram. Whereas we do not have that problem at all within the context of the octagram. We really don't. Because you either are it or you're not. And it's very verifiable, especially between the 2 temple wheels. So, structurally speaking, the octagram makes up your 2 cognitive origins. Each of the 16 types has 2 cognitive origins. And particularly since this lecture is devoted to the INFJ, the 2 cognitive origins in question is the origin of connection, also known as bonds, also known as intimacy. And then the other cognitive origin is that of justification, also known as excuses for all the people in the world. Kind of like my aunt. She is like she's like the biggest excuse engine that you've ever heard in your life. And this is why I can't have her in my life. And I drew so much joy extracting her and removing her from my life. And I never desire to have any conversation with her ever again. And I feel bad for family members that have to meet her at the family reunion every year. I feel really bad. But, I'm glad I'm not among them. I'm glad that I'm not around her because she is entirely ridiculous and the walking excuse engine. And she's supposed to be, creating excuses, aka absolution, for other people. But instead, she likes to create it for herself and spend it all on herself instead, which bothers me. So, anyway. The octagram is structured by cognitive origins, and each cognitive origin has a temple wheel that's attached to it. And each temple wheel has 4 spokes. You have your deadly sin, your living virtue, your shadow pole, and your aspiration pole. That is the entire point behind it. So, based on that, we find ourselves in a situation where we have 2 temple wheels, and how deadly sins and living virtues, shadow pole, aspiration pole, there's a set of those on each of your temple wheels. You have 2, 1 per cognitive origin. They all interact with each other. And it's like you have little tiny gears, which is your little spokes in your temple wheel, turning the big gears of your temple wheel, basically. And so, for example, since you have cognitive origin of justification and cognitive origin of connection, one affects the other. If you're giving other people justification, you better be receiving connection from them, and they better be connected to you, okay? That's how it works. or if you are connecting with other people and providing connection for them, then you are due justification. You are due those excuses, right? That means you are, if you're providing connection for others, that means they give you the special treatment of basically saying you're off the hook. That's ultimately what the cognitive origin of justification ultimately is. And that cognitive origin specifically is why humanity will always have a future. Why do I say that? Because, for example, when we're standing before the judge and all the books are opened out and all of humanity is basically being judged simultaneously, you're going to have that one guy that's going to be like, yeah, well, why don't you just let humanity off? I mean, you kind of did create us. I mean, isn't there a little bit of shared responsibility there, Lord God Creator? Why don't you just kind of let us off on this one? Why don't you just cut us a little bit of slack? You know what I'm saying? And that's ultimately a cognitive origin of justification. And that's where it will basically be ultimately represented, at the end of days, basically. So that's something that's very fascinating if you think about it. And it's wait a minute. Well, if there is a such thing as an end of days, I guess that means the sun isn't going to be around, right? I mean, you kind of have to have the sun to have a day, right? But a lot of people don't even consider that. So the point is, Octagram is the interpretation of how nurture impacts our nature. There are 4 paths of nurtural development, whereas the Enneagram tries to combine nurture with a bit of nature, demonstrating nurture shapes the expression of our nature. And that's the thing. These are 4 different variants. I talk a lot about objective personality system. He's our competition, Dave Powers. Gotta love Dave Powers. I mean, I learned from Dave Powers at the very beginning, basically 5 years into my studying of Jungian analytical psychology, because I've been doing this for 15 years at this point, in an effort to save my first marriage, which failed, ultimately. And then I succumbed to hubris in my second marriage because even though we were actually incompatible, and I knew we were incompatible ahead of time, I thought I could still make it work based on my knowledge of the science. And that's just basically pride and hubris on my part, and then I got bit. It is what it is. Pride comes before the fall, and that's what I deserve. And I'll live with that for the rest of my life, especially much to the chagrin of my 2-year-old. The thing is that unlike most people, I am willing to actually take full responsibility for it. I understand exactly where it is my personal responsibility lies as a result of that relationship, right? So based on that, I just allow bygones to be bygones, and I just move on and move forward within my life while simultaneously extracting the wisdom that I've learned from my suffering over the last 4 years as a result of that marriage, and then moving on and basically having a higher level of boundaries and expectations as a foundation for future relationships, which is ultimately everything and all that I can do. It is what it is. So based on that, nurture ends up becoming a high priority. One of the reasons why it's a high priority is because a lot of people don't realize how easy it is to ego hack, aka manipulate people through their nurture. Most people assume that, following season 21 content from a social engineering perspective, you can social engineer somebody by targeting their cognitive functions, which you can. The problem is that the ego, aka the parent function within the ego, will protect itself eventually. Whereas people don't see it coming when you're attacking their nurture from a social engineering perspective. The problem is that identifying someone's nurture is actually very difficult. Identifying their nature is very easy. It can be done in seconds, and I've done that many times. I've proven that on YouTube channel. In fact, in my opinion, in the actual last lecture about the INTJs and their octagram variants, with the people that were coming up to me on the street on camera and interrupting my lecture, I was psychoanalyzing them without even speaking a word to them, and I had them entirely pegged within a second or two, and then was basically delving into their minds right in front of them, and they had no idea how I was even capable of doing this, and I did it extremely quickly. That's how it goes with nurture. Hopefully I can get to that point, or with nature. Hopefully I can get to that point with nurture, because nurture presents the absolute best ego hacking attack surface available to any one person. And we're going to be slightly discussing that at the end of this particular lecture, just lightly touching it. All right, so the octagram reveals the 4 nuanced expressions for each type. Octagram is also a version of subtypes and details why each subtype or variant expresses themselves differently. Now, Dave Powers, with Objective Personality System, he talks about the subtypes. He has 512 different combinations, but they're all nature-based, none of which is nurture-based. And the reality of the situation is that it has to be nurture-based, because that is ultimately what the Enneagram was trying to accomplish. The problem is that the Enneagram decided they wanted to have an all-in-one system, and because of that all-in-one system, they did not actually want to include anything from the MBTI from a Jungian analytical psychology perspective. The problem is that it's very limited, and it does not provide enough information in terms of a person's nature, in terms of camaraderie, compatibility, all of those types of things. Cognitive synchronicity, cognitive asynchronicity, cognitive orbit, cognitive axis, cognitive reflection, and ultimately, the battlegrounds contained within cognitive reflection. So based on that, we have an impasse. We have a problem within the science. This is why the Enneagram basically had to be torn to shreds, and we rebuild it into something different known as the Octagram. But how does the Octagram actually form? Well, our environment forces us to prefer one side of the mind over the other. We have the four sides of the mind: ego, subconscious, unconscious, and superego. And then based on our environment, most specifically our childhood, it ends up developing from there over time. Our family, communities, and life experiences we face pressure our brains through neuroplasticity to adapt to our environment. Now, we talk about soft locking. Soft locking is the engine for the Octagram nurtural development. So if you don't know what soft locking is, and I mention this every episode in season 32, if you don't know what soft locking is, you need to watch the Cutting Edge podcast with me. I host it once a month here in the Journeyman section behind our paywall. I host it once a month. And the episode for December 2022 is the one that goes over, and it's July now. So this is like 8 months ago. You guys should really spend some time watching the Cutting Edge episode from 8 months ago in December 2022, because that entire episode is about soft locking and how it mechanically works. But the point is, using my mother as an example, and I like using my mother as an example because it's a perfect example of how cognitive development actually comes as a result of a parent to child relationship. And I'm not talking parent function to child function. I'm talking an actual parent to her child. My mother to me. So for example, she has extroverted feeling parent. It is a pessimistic function, right? Pessimistic functions have to find other pessimistic functions to interface with in the same way that optimistic functions have to find other optimistic functions to pair with, okay? And this is how cognitive synchronicity actually works. So cognitive synchronicity is a very primary mode of communication, and whereas camaraderie, also known as cognitive asynchronicity, is a secondary mode of communication between the minds. And because women, for example, or females, rely on perception more than they rely on judgment, and this is why men are oblivious, because men rely on judgment more than perception. This is why women are bad at making decisions, and men are good at making decisions. But men are oblivious and have a really hard time seeing things and perceiving things, and women make up that. That's why we have this thing called feminine intuition, basically, because their perceptional capabilities are far greater than that of men, right? Men, it's all about decision making. This is why women are typically bad at decision making and form packs, basically. Packs of women when they communicate, and that's why women talk but men do, because women have a hard time arriving to decision making, because their decision making is limited cognitively. So, based on that, soft locking ends up being a much bigger issue. So, for example, my mother's extroverted feeling parent was trying to interface with my introverted feeling trickster, but my introverted feeling trickster, producing morals and whatnot, is actually an optimistic function. So it would force me to cognitive transition into my ESFP superego, the worst part of my brain, in order for her to get any type of morality from me, from the FI parent, from my ESFP superego, which is the deepest part of my mind. And as a result of that, this created neural pathways that led to ultimately unconscious development as a person. This is an example of how soft locking works. Just understand that whatever function someone in authority has over you, like a parent to a child, when they use their functions to find the specific thing that they're looking for in your soul, it's going to force cognitive transition so that your brain is producing the specific function they are looking for. The problem is an extroverted feeling parent is not really going to like interfacing with a superego, and thus it can become a very negative experience over time, which leads to unconscious development over time. This is just an example. But that's ultimately how soft locking actually works. So yeah. Environment either enables or disables the expression of our ego. If you cannot express your ego fully in your environment, the pressure will lead you to the other sides of your mind. However, your psyche is always trying and still trying to achieve its cognitive origin, even from a different side of the mind. Not only that is it's trying to reach its cognitive origin, but it's also trying to push you into subconscious focus. And that's just something that will never stop. We start out trying to be subconscious focused as aspirational children, but in adulthood, things get a little messy, and sometimes we end up being unconscious focused versus subconscious focused regardless. And that can be a problem. Soft locking refines your ego, which is also known as ego enablement, or expands your ego, also known as ego disablement, forcing expansion to the other sides of your mind. Soft locking is the result of your life circumstances pushing you along the path to enlightenment. Enlightenment being you become a complete human being, because holiness as defined as being complete or lacking nothing. So basically the ego hacker definition of holiness is ultimately when your four sides of the mind are finally integrated and you basically become a complete human being. That's ultimately what holiness is from a cognitive perspective, right? Also what I'm sure what the Buddhists call nirvana, right? But it's just cognitive integration. That's all it is. So archetype plus origin divided by soft locking equals your octagram. So for example, INFJs are seeking intimacy or connection, also known as bonds, to touch others deeply, to be able to rely on others, and to know that their desire will always be welcome. They are looking for those who always provide opportunities to be sought after. Paradigm shifts, such as moving out of your house, taking on a new lover, changing careers or jobs, having a child, or starting over in a new city, often force paradigm shifts in your psyche, and that ends up changing your cognitive focus. This means that cognitive focus is far more variable, whereas cognitive development is far more static. This is often why childhood determines cognitive development and adolescence determines your first cognitive focus. As you age and circumstances change, your focus changes along with it. Okay? This is absolutely necessary. This is entirely important for people to realize. So, because of that, so cognitive development, it is determined basically by a person's childhood, and it can still change, but it could take decades to change, or head trauma, basically. And I've had the pleasure of knowing at least two individuals who do have head trauma, who did have their cognitive development actually, basically, it's just reset. It's just reset. And they're kind of like this walking tabula rasa, this clean slate, as nature ends up writing upon itself all over again. So now we have the four octagram variants of the INFJ. So let's take a look at what they look like. So we have the SDSF INFJ, which is objectification plus chastity, which means top performance guarantees bonds, right? Top performance guarantees bonds. So these are the people who go out of their way to be the absolute highest top performers, and then because they are the highest performers, everyone would basically desire them and desire to be connected to them. And what is the difference between a bond and an attachment? An attachment is a one-way street. And attachments, when INFJs get into attachments, they feel drained by other people because people just keep taking from them and taking without giving anything back. A true bond is when there's a two-way street. And this is something that we talk about at length in Ego Hacking Your Fear within the INFJ video in section 5. I highly recommend that if you're an INFJ and you're watching this, you watch that video through its totality. So SDSF INFJs are hyperdeveloped in their ESTP subconscious, where they tend to rely solely on their performance for connection, which many athletic superstars do on a regular basis. It's as if their soul temple God functions are saying, if you could do anything well, you will always be worthy and wanted, which is extrovert intuition God function. Of course, this drive tends to create lies and a penchant for self-rejection that INFJ carries in them, because they basically realize that they have to be a machine and shed their humanity in order to maintain the bonds that they have in their life. So for INFJs, performance is sacred in the most literal sense of the word. The ESTP subconscious, governed by the mind temple, is where the INFJ's natural capacity for teaching comes in. SDSF INFJs can be particularly skilled at teaching others skills and trades that the INFJ is also skilled in. It's like a master versus apprentice approach. You can read more about this in Robert Greene's book, Mastery, and the SDSF INFJ is the one that encompasses that the most. So the SDSF INFJs can be extremely volatile with their self-worth. While all INFJs can experience this, SDSF INFJs tend to derive their self-worth entirely from their performance and whether or not other people value it. What happens when attention and appreciation don't follow their performance? Basically, they cut those people off. Because from their perspective, they have this personal standard of bonds. And it's like, hey, if there isn't a two-way street, and I know I am the top performer in the room, I know that I have sacrificed my humanity, okay, as the best performer in the room, and I sacrificed my humanity. I became a machine, basically. And it's just like that song called The Machine. It's an amazing song, a very heart-temple song, but it talks about a woman falling in love with one of these top-performing INFJ SDSFs, and I love the lyrics, I love the song, it's exquisite. It's one of my most favorite songs that I listen to probably on a daily basis, actually. But you know, and it's really because it's like, hey, you know, I derive my self-worth entirely from my performance. I'm basically this top-performing machine. I shed my humanity. I sacrifice my humanity as a result so that I could be this machine that is a top performer. So why aren't you connected to me? Why are you only giving me attachment instead of a bond? Oh, okay, if that's what's really happening, you should not be in my life anymore. And then they will cut them out. SDSF INFJs have this personal standard and this boundary, and they are extremely likely to door slam anyone that does not return their performance with their cognitive origin of bonds, aka connection. This is also the joy energy. These INFJs, while they are the most machine-like, they are also the most overjoyed because they just love seeing everyone react to them and taking on other people's reactions as often as possible. It's one of the most beautiful things to see. And then there's the SDUF INFJ, which is the objectification lust types. Now, remember what lust is all about. We have to probably define chastity as well because we just did objectification chastity. Chastity is doing the best with what you have because it's what you have, instead of lusting after other people, which is jealousy. Jealousy is just wanting what other people have, but chastity does not want what other people have. Chastity is looking to optimize what is already had, basically. And chastity is a far healthier look instead of lusting or being jealous of what other people have. And the theme for the SDUF INFJ, which is a decay type, decay, so we have joy for SDSF, we have decay for SDUF. Decay, these little archetypes come from Strauss and Howe theory. Got to give credit where it's due. Elliot Woodhead, a.k.a. Lane, on the Discord server, the EcoHacker Discord, discord.gg/EcoHackers, although the point is that SDUF types are unconscious focused. And anytime you have an unconscious focused type, well, guess what? It is it's not permanent. It's not a permanent mind state. A permanent mind state is subconscious focused, or a more permanent, that is. And it's still variable. Cognitive focus is still variable, but it's where the mind prefers to go. The mind prefers to be in subconscious focus, ultimately. So, and if they're not subconscious focused, then you will suffer many of life crises, quarter-life crisis, midlife crisis, etc., in order to get you to subconscious focus. It's the brain literally forcing things in your life, forcing you to get to your proper cognitive focus, regardless of what your cognitive development actually is. That is the thing. So the theme of the SDUF Decay INFJ Objectification Lust is, quote, I am becoming worthy of my bonds. It's like they have to prove to everybody else that they are connected with, that they deserve to have those connections, basically. And they're constantly trying to prove themselves all the time. And these are the people who had really good childhoods. And they were enabled and potentially even spoiled in childhood. The problem is that they hit adulthood, and all of a sudden they realize that everything that they were praised on, everything that they were enabled on, everything that they were spoiled on as children has no actual value in adulthood. And no one's really interested in connecting with them because of the things that they were praised on. It's like an INFJ who's really good at playing Halo and was praised by their parents at being really good at playing Halo and winning a couple of tournaments, only to hit adulthood and realize that no one actually values that. No one wants to be connected to a Halo expert, for example. And this ultimately creates SDUF Octagram variant of INFJ, a decay-based survive. And if you're unconscious focus, it's a form of survival mode, right? Because they hit adulthood and it's like, oh dang, I can't be connected to anyone, I can't get bonds, I can't get my primary cognitive origin because of these issues, right? And that too is a major problem for INFJ archetypes, right? Especially SDUFs. So SDUF INFJs developed into their ESTP subconscious in their youth, but were later pushed away from solely relying on performance to attain connection. And also because their performance was kind of a lie. It wasn't actually true performance. They weren't being that machine, basically. It was more of it's kind of like fake. It's like they invested into all of the wrong things, basically. They were sold a lie as children by their parents or their environment, only to reach adulthood and to realize that they're having this rude awakening that they lost out on all of that. As the SDUF variant is the rude awakening octagram, SDUF INFJs came to realize that their performance alone was not sufficient to achieve lasting deep connections. They have sold themselves for cheap or shallow connections, trading performance for surface attachments, which is really sad. These are the INFJs, like I know an INFJ woman whose body count is in the thousands, for example, and it's literally because she was really enabled as a child, but enabled in the wrong things by her parents, only to hit adulthood to realize that absolutely has no value whatsoever as an adult, basically. And then because of that, it all comes crashing down. I actually know a little girl. By a particular ego hacker. And this little girl, I am very concerned about her future because her mother continues to spoil her and her father continues to spoil her in all of the wrong things. And I personally believe they're creating an SDUF variant of their daughter without even realizing it. Because she is subconscious developed, but she will end up subconscious developed unconscious focus. She will have unconscious focus later in life. And it's going to be disastrous. It's going to be absolutely disastrous. And from an INFJ perspective, like an INFJ woman, this woman became a prostitute. She became a prostitute, basically. And it's no different from the woman known as Gomer in the book of Hosea. And it would require a Hosea in her life, and those men are extremely rare, in order for her to actually reach some semblance of self-acceptance due to FI critic being very critical towards her self-worth. It's going to suck. It's going to suck for that INFJ, as much as it's going to suck for this little girl. And I'm very, very concerned about this little girl. And honestly, in the very near future, we're going to be doing a how to parent the 16 types again, but from an octagram perspective. And that octagram series is basically, okay, how do you parent the 16 types to get them towards subconscious focus, basically? And we're going to be looking at examples of the 4 variants in children, what to do, what not to do, etc., to properly guide your children in the correct direction. And that's going to basically be the parenting season, but part 2, where we're going to be delving into the octagram for that purpose. Okay? So, yeah. The pole of ENFP shadow for the SDUF INFJ is to derive a sense of worth and investment from their bonds. Lust is, or jealousy, in part about acquiring the self-acceptance to pursue what one really wants, which is bonds. Beginning to examine the desirability in addition to performance, the SDUF INFJ's lust, or jealousy, is seeking to become like the people who are desirable in the INFJ's eyes. SDUF INFJs emulate envy in this way. And this particular variant of INFJ also has a severe problem with what Soul Temple often does, and sometimes Mind Temple, or really what Templars often do, especially NFJs, where they do this thing known as fake it until you make it, which is an extremely unhealthy behavior and should be avoided at all costs. Never fake it until you make it. Never do that. It's horrible. Don't recommend it. Stay away from it. So the awakening of the SDUF INFJ is also about lacking in self-worth and also lacking in self-esteem. The enablement of the SDSF variant likely suppressed the development of the introverted feeling critic. Thus, they end up seeking worthiness through realizing there is more to life than performance, and that's the journey of the SDUF INFJ. More to life than just performance. And then they end up utilizing the pain that they have of having that rude awakening and then developing some semblance of wisdom because they realize that they need wisdom in order to make it through all the way, because the people raising them lacked the wisdom to enable them in the proper places. So because their parents lack that wisdom, they have to come up with wisdom on their own to solve that problem. And once they've attained the wisdom that they need, only then can they start working on the path to becoming subconscious focused after they've suffered in life with unconscious focus to gain the wisdom that they need to be able to enable themselves to get to subconscious focus. That is the entire point. All right. Then we have the UDSF INFJ, which is idolatry, aka idealization, plus chastity. Bonds are created by treating others as their best selves. What an amazing theme. So the UDSF variant is the hope energy, and UDSF statistically is the most successful of the 4 octagram variants. These are the people who had disabled upbringings, very disabled upbringings, but still somehow did not give up on themselves, somehow did not lack in self-esteem, basically, and because of that, they were able to accomplish everything that they needed to accomplish, which is awesome. They're on the path to accomplishing things in their life, which is amazing, and I'm very glad that exists. I'm very glad that that's a thing entirely. Hopefully, we can keep our independence from the elite. So, UDSF INFJs developed into their ENFP shadow in childhood. Being desirable and having a source of gratitude and moral feedback was necessary for their survival. Expert intuition nemesis plus FI critic. Later, perhaps in adolescence, they found a place, a school, a social circle, etc., that fostered and rewarded their performance with connection. UDSF INFJs are drawn to things that expand their wisdom and metaphysical understanding, ENFP shadow, and that cultivate their ability to perform, which is ESTP subconscious. UDSFs are they're very balanced. They're very balanced people. And UDSF INFJs learn to see the best in other people, particularly the best in people they desire, which I have a UDSF INFJ in my life, and if that's what he does for me, I am very grateful because I've had everyone else in my life just tell me that, I'm a piece of shit. That they just automatically assume I'm manipulating them. They automatically assume that I'm trying to mind control them or something. When the reality of the situation is that I like to have bonds with people too, right? Soul Temple is part of my shadow. My INTJ shadow is dominated by Soul Temple influence. I want to be accepted by others. I want to by default. I don't want to have to wear masks around people. I don't want to have to manipulate others. And any time that I'm being insincere or doing any of that, it's because I'm trying to survive and survive those people, because people are not so easily replaced. So oftentimes I have to wear a mask and be fake around other people when I don't want that whatsoever. I would rather just be able to be my raw and real self and accepted as my raw and real self. And this directly applies to my relationships, especially my sexual relationships. If I am not accepted 100%, then I'm not really going to go anywhere with those people. And instead, they're just going to get the mask, which sucks. So idealization, which is the shadow pull, it's the heart temple pull. It creates bonds through passion. To see the best in others is to cultivate excitement in what a person could be, and the INFJ may see who they could be with that person. The huge risk for UDSF INFJs, however, is putting people on a pedestal, basically. Over-idealization can take the form of a kind of perverted objectification where they objectify someone else as an idol. This is how the two side poles can bend into each other. UDSF INFJs often learn the hard way that idolatry or idealization in this way only destroys their bonds or creates incredibly imbalanced relationships. And one of the reasons why is that oftentimes their idealization actually ignores literally measuring properly the status or the value of the bond itself, if it really is a two-way street, such that they can actually forget their own contributions or they can forget the contributions of the other person. And it creates a little bit of blindness over the quality of the bond itself, which inhibits their ability to actually judge the bond properly. And then as a result, because they have this hope energy and they're hoping, they actually can get taken advantage over time, or they themselves can end up actually being the person who are taking advantage of the bond or the attachment, basically. And this is oftentimes where there's like a reverse attachment, where they're the one actually taking from the other person. It can happen both ways, though, because our idealization can get in the way, and it can be unhealthy because of that hope energy. That hope energy, they themselves can take advantage of or be taken advantage. It's kind of fascinating how that works. And this is how it can be perverted objectification. So the secret for unconscious, developed, subconscious focused INFJs is the combination of desirability plus self-acceptance, plus the growing horizon of performance and competence. As they age and develop their subconscious focus, they will actually be able to gain those tools as a result. So when self-acceptance meets performance, the NI hero can achieve whatever it wants, and often with whomever it wants. The question for both unconscious developed INFJs, though, is bonds or attachment. Radical self-acceptance is a fundamental piece of moving closer to bonds and away from attachment. But the other issue is proper judgment of the quality of the bond itself, even if it's not even an attachment. And sometimes it can lead to imbalance within the bond, which can break down the bond and lead to attachment. And that, too, is a huge risk. UDSF INFJs are actually high risk of this. However, sometimes they have to flow away, sometimes they have to door slam, sometimes they have to put up boundaries, or sometimes they have to force the other person to put up boundaries, which in my case is something that actually happened recently, as I've been often accused of being Mr. TMI and sharing too much, often to the detriment of other people, which I accept and realize that that's a true criticism, and I've been working very hard to change that. But at the same time, given that I've just recently finished my transformation from UDUF to UDSF in the process, the person that I became as a result of becoming subconscious focused, which is extremely hard to maintain subconscious focus after being UDUF so long and having all those UDUF neural pathways already present and trying to build new neural pathways to maintain the subconscious focus within myself, I end up becoming very much at risk of, expecting other people to just accept the raw version of myself, as a UDSF ENTP would. And this actually can end up harming relationships with INFJs in my life, because all of a sudden I was consistent in behaving one way, and all of a sudden I've just changed and I'm in a new direction now. And it's like whiplash or shell shock, basically, and they have a hard time dealing with this. And oftentimes, because of that change, they end up door slamming me anyway, because they just don't even know what to do. It's like all of a sudden their idol wasn't behaving the way that they used to behave anymore, and then that destroys my level of acceptance with them, and thus, from their perspective, they are often indignantly perceiving that the bond has broken down, when the reality of the situation is the bond has just changed. That's all. It's just changed. But they're not used to it. And because they're not used to it, they have a hard time judging that consistency that they were used to before. And because of that, oftentimes it leads to a door slam, albeit an unfair door slam. But that's just life, and I accept that. I would never judge them for that. Just like I don't judge people for not expecting me to be their cup of tea, because let's be honest, I'm C.S. Joseph. I'm not everyone's cup of tea. Just read Reddit, Then you come down to the UDUF INFJs, which is the despairing INFJs, idealization plus lust or jealousy, survival mode INFJs, which is attachment is survival. Survival is justification. But attachment is survival. The thing is that these people have such low self-esteem. These people have such low self-regard, low self-respect with their FI critic. And they're so self-deprecating that from their perspective, they're willing to settle. They're willing to settle for attachment instead of actually holding people accountable using their justification origin, which is the accountability origin attached to the deadly sin of wrath, for example. Holding people accountable to the standard of bonds, and instead they settle for attachment. And it really, really sucks to be the UDUF INFJ. They are insanely self-destructive. And because of that, they take everyone else down with them. Like, for example, the boys in the Columbine shooting, one of them was an INFJ, and that's exactly what happened. I often feel bad for these people. But attachment is survival. UDUF INFJs were completely disabled in their early environment. Intimacy was rare, connection was rare, bonds were rare, and likely unreliable. And when they see consistency, they see the consistency in life being, oh, these people are being consistently inconsistent. And as a result, these INFJs actually lose their belief in their cognitive origin of bonds, connection, and intimacy, and then they end up overvaluing justification instead, right? So, freedom was also likely rare. Abuse and trauma were likely to be present for all UDUF types anyway, but especially for the INFJ, because the INFJ was just used by other people in their childhood and also their adulthood. Without intimacy or the cognitive origin of bonds or stability in their environment, the UDUF INFJ had to draw deep within, reaching into the endurance and adaptability of their ENFP shadow and even pushing into their SI demon in the ISTJ superego. Demonic endurance characterizes the UDUF INJs. Without being able to rely on intimacy, the primary focus became justification. Their ENFP and ISTJ sides become fixated on what would lead to punishment, but more likely how they could avoid the abuse or the strain in their environment. And oftentimes UDUF INFJs, they have TI child God complex, where they elect themselves the judge, the jury, and executioner, because this is ISTJ focus, basically. They're focused on their ISTJ side of their mind, their superego, judge, jury, and executioner. Because from their perspective, everyone else in their life played God with them, so the UDUF INFJ is justified in playing God. And that's the problem. These types become more of a judge, often a self-judge, where they take the standards of what allowed them to survive in their early environment and adapt and apply that to others. They are often very wrathful to others who do not share their same penchant for survival. Like that one guy, John Zenka or something like that, who we discussed in Typing Famous People Discord edition recently, which is just some random thing. It's also like this training thing that we do with Chris Taylor. It's really fun. Every now and then we'll ping those out, and you guys can just show up and just start sticking names while we practice typing and teach our coaching staff how to type other people in real time. It's a really fun thing. Be on the Discord so that you guys can get access to that when the ping actually goes out. Deep down, the UDUF INFJ is still desperately looking for someone to rely on, but true bonds are likely to seem like a fantasy or a fake or something that's not really of this world, which is just really sad to me. I love INFJs. I love being connected to them. I love being bonded to them. But for some reason, they either often just end up killing themselves or they end up door slamming me because I don't fit their ethical standard, which is understandable. I don't blame them. So attachment, and ultimately using other people to meet their needs as they were likely used themselves, is the strategy that they are used to in order to achieve what intimacy they can find. And like I said, they're settling for attachment. It's just so sad. So they rely on justification for survival. This is, quote, this is what I did to survive, is what enabled them to feel okay about usury, being used and using others. So for those that exist beyond using others and using of self, attachment is what is left. The vampire aspect of lust comes about through attachment. And what this basically means is that they are okay with wanting what others have, and to the point where UDUF INFJs take what other people have. They just take it. These are thieves, okay? These people are thieves. And oftentimes they end up developing this weird Robin Hood complex to a point where it's like they're willing to steal for other people. They're willing to commit crimes for other people, which is also extremely sad. But I've seen it happen over and over and over. So, still, some UDF INFJs steer entirely away from any connection with others because they view all connections as usury. They may take the path of the lone wolf, enduring the trials of unbearable loneliness so that they do not get their hands dirty with all the usury and attachments. It's a very lonely path. And no one struggles with loneliness more than an INFJ or ESTP. No one struggles with loneliness more. And it's just so sad to me. It's absolutely so sad. The only types that come close to struggling with loneliness is ENTPs and INTJs. They come close. They represent the most lonely types in the heart temple, but in the soul temple, and the soul temple as the ego of humanity, it's the ESTPs and INFJs who struggle the most with loneliness, especially the UDUF variants. The UDUF variants of those four types absolutely have it the hardest. So for UDUF INFJs, the question ends up often becoming, is love even real? Is there more to life than attachments and usury? They often have to be shown there is in order to even consider believing it. Until then, attachment is survival, and survival is justification. And really, just to get out of it, all they have to do is become the thing that people are jealous of instead of being jealous of others. And then because of that, they can start developing their subconscious focus. So, what about social engineering? What about ego hacking, right? If cognitive origin never changes, regardless of development and focus, then giving an INFJ their cognitive origin through their preferred poles is the best way to reach them. So for objectification, this is best met by acknowledging their skill and performance. They are seeking others who are impartial to their performance and able to weigh the pros and cons. Objectification is always looking for improvement and not flattery. The idealization pole, previously known as idolatry, but we changed it to idealization, it's best met by pointing out the best parts of the INFJ and the best in others. They are seeking the favoritism, discrimination of someone who values them as special and sees the INFJ for what they could be, and is willing to stick around as the INFJ moves toward realizing this ideal. Absolutely. And there's one particular UDSF INFJ in my life where I just can't help but do this for him because I just love him that much. I absolutely adore him, and sometimes even to my own detriment, and sometimes even to his own detriment, let's be honest. But the reality of the situation is that I often show him favoritism and discrimination above any other in my life. I just do, because I just love him so much. And oftentimes I find myself with my FE child just not able to help it. I just can't help it. So both the four sides dynamics and the octagram are dynamic, but the octagram is even more so because it deals exclusively with nurture. The deeper implication of an octagram variant is to understand how the other temple origins are siphoned through the poles. For example, check out Ego Hacking by Text Masterclass for more, and that is available at egohackingbytext.com. Anyway, folks, that's it for the 4 octagram variants of the INFJ. This has been Season 32, Episode 12. Thanks for watching and listening for the Ego Hacker community and helping move us forward. I love all of you INFJs. I love my pedagogue type. I hope to learn how to increase my ability to have bonds with you folks and not treat you folks with attachment, because I love all of you and I just would love to keep all of you in my life. Anyway, folks, thanks for watching and listening, and I'll see you guys tonight on the Discord. Later.